My definition of racism and white anti-misogynist has been criticized for being old-fashioned, for being 1960s, guess who's coming for dinnerish, and that today's racism is further down this line. See, I want racist being up here, but they're saying it should go further down that line. Now, I know what is not a racist. A person who's not a racist is someone who thinks that you should judge people not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. But some people say, Mr. Horn, that presumes that we live in a post-racial society, and that's not true. That dream has not come true. So you're wrong in thinking that's what a not racist is. So we're left, I think, here. What is a hardcore anti-racist? Now, I found this definition on the internet. Anti-racism is the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organization structures, policies and practices, and attitudes so that power is redistributed and shared equitably. So I have a number of problems with this definition. The first is it talks about racism as being something that's in the system, in the structure, in the policies, in the practice, and only in the end, in the attitudes. And I'm talking about racist people. I'm not talking about racist systems. But secondly, this is saying that anti-racism is a political movement that says power should be redistributed and shared equitably. This sounds a little Marxist to me. I'm not saying it is Marxist, I'm just saying it sounds a little Marxist to me. So, where shall we put the line between a racist and not a racist? I'm going to give you the one that the best test, and I call it the Charles Murray test. And this is Charles Murray, the author of The Bell Curve, who says that there is a difference in the intelligence of black and white folk. Is that racist? And I think by that definition of anti-racism, whenever we see an inequity, it's because of a systemic racism. So my question, I guess I could ask this question in another way, because I don't really want to talk about Charles Murray. I don't have time to. But I could ask it in a different way. Is every case of inequity between white and black people a case of racism, or could there be another reason behind that, or could there be multiple reasons behind it, including systemic racism, whatever that is? And the best thing to look at is the SAT. There is a 100-point difference between the average of black SAT takers and white SAT takers. And before you start telling me about race and how race is a social construct, we're not talking about race. We're talking about a population group that defines themselves as black. They bubble into black. And another population group that defines themselves as white, they bubble in the white. And we're asking about the difference, because there's a 100-point difference in the math scores. And the question is, why? And I think if you're a hardcore anti-racist who follows that definition, you would say, well, because there's systemic racism. You might think that the SAT itself is racist, or you might say that the school system is racist. But there's racism is the part that you blame. And I would say, well, let's look at something else just for a moment. Not forget the black and white difference. Let's look at the difference between white and Asians. And boy, if you don't think black is a race, Asian is not a race either. That's everyone from the Philippines, the Vietnamese, the Chinese, the people from India. I mean, come on. This is not a race. It's a place where you check Pacific Islander Asians. And I'm going to show you this chart. Let me show you this first. So, black people, 220,000 black people took this SAT test, 200,000 Asians, and 800,000 whites. And this is how it came out. And you can't see this, and I don't care because I'm going to zoom in to something else. Just think about, and there's a 100-point difference between blacks and whites, but there's a 60-point difference between whites and Asians. And the question is, why is there a 60-point difference? Is it because of systemic racism? And if so, are those Asians in power? Are they controlling stuff? But it gets even weirder, guys. Look at this. This is just so fascinating to me because I love SATs. We're talking about the top group. We're talking about people who made 750 to 800 in the math. If you don't know anything about SATs, these are the people who are freaks. Freaks of nature, I call them. 60% of them were Asian. That's 30,000 Asians. 33% of them were white. That's 15,000 white. So wait a minute. There are 4-to-1 white people taking the SAT. And yet, when you look at the smartest group, twice as many Asians. How can that be? It can't be that Asians go to richer schools and their parents have higher degrees. I mean, it might be. That might be a part of it. But really, when you have 4 times the amount of white people taking the test, and yet twice as many Asians score in the top, that's crazy. Oh, by the way, just to cause more trouble, 62% of men score in the top 100 from 700 to 800, and 38% of women score. Now, this I think is all interesting, and the question then is, why is all this stuff happening? Now, am I racist just for bringing this up? Because the choices, as I see them, is that it could be genetic. And this is what Charles Murray says in his bell curve that causes so much trouble. The other thing, though, it could be is cultural. This is what Flynn, of the Flynn effect, says. He says that there's a culture, a test-taking culture among Asians. Asians just have to destroy on tests. White people, not so much. Black people don't seem to care very much about it. Just in general, of course, if you're an Asian person or a white person or a black person watching this, this is not talking about you. It's talking about a population group. I used to tell my girls, are you kidding? Do you know how many people who are so much smarter than I am? I could tell you, name you a half a dozen teachers and, 3 or 4 kids in this room who have a higher IQ than me. I mean, almost my entire AP class could do calculus, which I couldn't do. So anyway, I'm not sure what the definition of a racist is. You can tell me, but I'm sticking with mine. If you think that your children should not have be married to a racist, then to a black person, then you're a racist. Which is why, by the way, that Ted Danson, I don't think he's a racist, even though he dressed up in blackface and ate watermelon on stage, because he was dating Whoopi Goldberg. She dared him to do it. It was a joke, a bad joke. And I think, by the way, since 1994, since Ted Danson did that, we realized that you cannot go on stage, even if you're Whoopi Goldberg's boyfriend. It is. I think now if you go on stage and dress up in blackface, you are a racist. Since 1994.